back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8, and the message that we would like to send to you. The beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light. They was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day.
In the beginning, the void, the darkness, then light, then life. And from life came man, joining the caravan for the long, slow journey through a world of discovery, invention, exploration. His marks, his milestones, stretch out through the centuries. His footsteps echo down through the corridors of time. Time. July 1969 in Florida. The footsteps, the caravan quickened. The corridors shortened as man
We
reached
choose to go
outside
to
his world into
Wow,
another void.
that ambition, that challenge, it still really resonates, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A defining moment.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on a pivotal speech. President Kennedy at Rice University, September 12th, 1962.
Right, and this wasn't just, a policy announcement. This felt like the public ignition point for Apollo.
Exactly. It put that goal, landing a human on the moon, front and center. You might be wondering, okay, what led up to this? What were his key arguments? Why does it still matter?
And that's what we want to unpack. We'll look at news reports from the time, historical analyses, even some recent online chatter around its 60th anniversary.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Early 1960s America. What's the backdrop?
Well, you absolutely cannot separate this from the Cold War. The space race wasn't a sideshow. It was perceived as a critical front.
Right. Sputnik 1 and 57. That must have been a shock.
A huge shock. It wasn't just a beeping satellite. It felt like a major Soviet technological and therefore ideological victory.
And then Yuri Gagarin in April 61. The first man in space.
Exactly. So the U.S. definitely felt behind. There was real pressure.
Even Eisenhower saw it coming, setting up NASA in 58.
Huh?
But Project Mercury initially was just about basic survival, wasn't it? Like, can humans even function up there?
Pretty much proving the basics, which makes Kennedy's 1961 State of the Union offer to the Soviets, offering cooperation in space, seem almost, surprising.
Yeah, given the tension, it feels counterintuitive.
It does, but maybe it shows he grasped the sheer scale of what space exploration would involve. Anyway, they refused.
And that refusal just poured fuel on the competitive fire, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The fear was real. If the Soviets dominated space, what did that mean for military power, global influence, the whole Cold War dynamic? It felt like very high stakes. You could almost hear the ticking clock, that sense of urgency building.
Like the fuse was lit.
Yeah, and then boom, May 25th, 1961, Kennedy goes before Congress.
And makes the announcement. Man on the moon, back safely by the end of the decade.
It's still audacious when you think about it, just the sheer scale.
And he didn't downplay the difficulty, did he? He was upfront about the cost, the challenge.
Not at all. He acknowledged it, but framed it as potentially the most impressive feat for mankind, vital for long-range exploration.
So it wasn't just a flag-planting exercise in his mind.
No, he talked about needing new boosters, exploring beyond the moon, thinking bigger picture, and crucially, Congress said yes. Work started almost right away.
Leading to Project Gemini.
Right, which was all about solving the practical problems for a lunar mission. How do you fly for longer periods? How do you spacecraft dock? What does weightlessness actually do to people long term? Stuff like that.
Okay, so fast forward to September 62, Rice University Stadium. The Moonshot goal is out there, but this speech, it feels different, more persuasive.
Totally. This was about convincing America, the public, not just Congress, that this incredibly hard thing was worth doing, that it was the next logical step, almost inevitable.
So how did he build that argument?
Well, it's a masterclass, really. He starts with ethos building credibility, praises Rice, praises Houston's can-do spirit, creates that connection.
And then that incredible compression of history.
Yeah, the whirlwind tour. 50,000 years squeezed into 50, just to hammer home how fast things were changing now.
It's so effective. Electricity in cars were last month, penicillin in TV last week.
Uh-huh. and then reaching Venus before midnight tonight. It really lands the point about the accelerating pace of progress, makes the moonshot seem like the next bullet point on the timeline.
Okay, so that's establishing his credibility, showing he gets the big picture, then the logic, the logos.
Right. He lays out the facts, the technical challenges. He doesn't sugarcoat the Saturn V rocket, taller than a football field,
Needing new metals, handling incredible heat and stress.
built like a fine watch, aiming for an unknown target, facing re-entry at insane speeds. He detailed it all.
Using those analogies, the football field, the watch makes it graspable, even if you don't know the engineering specifics.
Exactly. And then the budget comparison. $5.4 billion a year for space versus what Americans spent on cigarettes and cigars.
Oof. That puts it in perspective. Makes it a choice about national priorities.
Precisely. What do we value? But it wasn't just logic. The emotional appeal, the pathos, is incredibly strong.
All the use of we, you mentioned, what, 46 times?
Yeah, constantly reinforcing that shared identity, that national project. We are doing this.
And the imagery, space as a new ocean.
Right. A frontier that could be peaceful or a terrifying theater of war, framing American leadership as essential for peace.
And then the lines, the ones everyone remembers.
We choose to go to the moon, he says it twice. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Yes. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. That repetition, that framing of difficulty as the reason. It's powerful stuff. It really became the defining challenge.
It elevates it beyond just a technical goal. It's a test of character, almost.
Absolutely. And he even references George Mallory, the Everest climber, because it is there. Tapping into that fundamental human urge to explore, to push boundaries.
He paints a picture of space exploration as noble, too. About knowledge, not weapons.
Yeah, instruments of knowledge and understanding under a banner of freedom and peace. It's a very aspirational vision he's selling. It really tapped into something deep, that desire for progress.
And how he delivered it. That matters, too, right?
Definitely. He mostly read from the script, apparently, but still made good eye contact. The pace, around 120 words per minute, sounds authoritative, but lets people absorb it.
And emphasizing key bits.
Yeah.
Like doing it right and doing it first.
That definitely played into the Cold War context. Competition was key.
You mentioned the other things in that famous quote. What did he mean by that?
Well, that wasn't throwaway. He was explicitly talking about the spin-offs, the broader scientific and tech advancements that would inevitably come from focusing so intensely on the moonshot, like needing new materials, better propulsion, advanced communications, things that would have uses far beyond just space.
And we saw those, didn't we? Our sources mentioned satellite TV broadcasts via Syncom 2.
Better weather satellites like TIROS, navigation systems like Transit. The pressure cooker of the space race really did accelerate innovation everywhere.
Plus the economic side. New companies, hundreds of thousands of jobs.
For sure. That line about organizing and measuring our energies or skills really points to those wider long-term benefits. It touched everything: healthcare, computing, materials science. It was this huge collaborative push.
Involving everyone from scientists to engineers to entrepreneurs.
Exactly. A massive unified effort.
And, well, he did it. July 1969. Neil Armstrong's one small step, Kennedy's commitment, fulfilled just under the wire, though he wasn't there to see it.
A bittersweet triumph in that sense. But the achievement stands. It's interesting, though, how people debate its significance even now.
Right, those online discussions you mentioned. Is it humanity's greatest engineering feat? People argue for penicillin or vaccines or the internet.
And it's a fair debate, greatest is subjective. But when you look purely at the complexity of Apollo, the metallurgy, orbital mechanics, life support, just getting all the pieces to work together flawlessly, it was staggering.
A systems engineering marvel unlike anything before it.
Truly. And it's also kind of poignant that just a year after the Rice speech in '63, Kennedy actually proposed a joint U.S.-Soviet moon mission.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, but Cold War tensions were still too high. The Soviets declined. Makes you wonder, what if, doesn't it?
Definitely an alternate history there.
Yeah.
So wrapping this up, the Rice speech, it really was more than just words.
Oh, absolutely. It was this potent mix, understanding the historical moment, laying out the logical necessity, appealing to deep emotions, and painting this clear, incredibly ambitious vision.
And it galvanized the nation to do something extraordinarily difficult.
Yes. And that emphasis on the difficulty, the hard part, is key. The journey, the innovation, the collaboration it forced, that was arguably as important as the moon rocks themselves.
It really showed what's possible with that kind of focus and unity.
It did. It remains this benchmark for collective achievement.
Which does make you think, considering that level of ambition that Unity Kennedy inspired.
Yeah.
What are the big challenges facing us today that could use that kind of moonshot thinking?
That's the question, isn't it? What are our modern hard things that could, organize and measure the best of our energies and skills now?
Something for all of us to think about.
The preparation that NASA undertook to make landing on the moon even possible.
It's more than just the astronauts, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's this huge hidden story, really. We're talking thousands of engineers, multiple NASA centers, contractors too.
And countless tests.
Countless tests, and importantly, a lot of failed tests. Plus constant prototyping, refining designs. It really was like meticulously building this impossible ladder to the stars, step by step.
That's a great way to put it. And we have to remember the danger, the inherent risk.
Definitely.
Launching rockets isn't trivial. I mean, we saw the Antares rocket explosion back in 2014,
Yep.
a modern reminder.
Right.
And the Apollo teams, building on earlier missile work, they were acutely aware of that potential for catastrophe. It wasn't an unknown.
No, they absolutely understood the stakes. And a central figure in navigating all this huge challenge, was Wernher von Braun.
Yeah.
We'll hear a bit from him today, get some insight into the mindset you needed for something this audacious.
Okay, so let's start with the scale.
The
team, you said thousands.
Yeah, it was colossal. And spread out, too. You had the Marshall Space Flight Center down in Alabama. That was von Braun's turf, mostly rocket development.
The big Saturn V came from there.
Exactly. Then the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, focusing on the spacecraft, the command module, lunar module, astronaut training.
And NASA headquarters in D.C. trying to coordinate everything.
Right, overseeing the whole program, plus, all the external companies, the contractors building specific parts. It was a massive network.
And within that huge network, they didn't all agree on how to make sure things wouldn't, blow up, right?
Right.
How to ensure reliability.
That's a key point. Especially early on, in the early 60s, there wasn't one single playbook for reliability across NASA.
Interesting. So different approaches.
Yeah. You had some people, maybe more at headquarters, leaning towards statistical methods, trying to quantify reliability from test data, calculate the odds.
Makes sense. Very analytical.
But then you had von Braun and his engineers at Marshall. They had a different philosophy, much more hands-on.
How so?
Well, von Braun talked about needing an almost religious vigilance and attention to detail. He believed deeply that having his Marshall engineers directly involved, really embedded with the contractors, did far more for reliability than just crunching numbers.
Vigilance. So direct oversight over pure statistics.
Pretty much. He famously said that this direct involvement did more for reliability than all the statistical studies combined, in my humble opinion, at least.
Wow. And did that approach work?
Well, the record speaks for itself, doesn't it? The sources point out that even though some theoretical reliability experts were, let's say, pessimistic based on stats, all 10 of the initial Saturn V rockets launched successfully. Every single one.
That's compelling. 100% success rate.
It really validated their approach, But it's not like they ignored analysis altogether.
Right.
The Marshall team definitely used analytical tools. Things like failure mode and effect analysis, basically figuring out what could break and what happens if it does, and criticality analysis. They saw these as useful additions to their core belief in meticulous hands-on engineering.
So a blend, really. Analysis informing the hands-on work.
Exactly. And meanwhile, back at headquarters, the thinking was evolving too. A guy named Joseph Shea came in.
Yeah, okay.
And he started pushing for something he called engineering confidence.
Engineering confidence, what's that?
It's less about just the statistical probability derived from tests, and more about building confidence through really digging into why things fail during testing. Deep failure analysis.
Understanding the root cause.
Precisely. And his boss, George Mueller, who was a major figure in Apollo, he supported this idea too. Focusing on inherent confidence in the actual engineering design and build quality, proven through rigorous testing rather than just relying on calculated odds.
Which brings us squarely to testing, doesn't it? Everyone seemed to agree on that regardless of their philosophy.
Absolutely fundamental. Whether you were calculating statistics or building engineering confidence, you needed data. And that came from testing. Intense testing.
And the Marshall approach under von Braun was particularly thorough.
You could say that. They embraced what's called testing to failure or limit testing.
Testing to failure, not just until failure.
Right. It wasn't just, does this part work under expected conditions? It was, let's push this thing until it breaks and understand exactly how and why it broke.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, say a fuel tank. They wouldn't just test if it held the required pressure. They'd deliberately overpressurize it, maybe way beyond the design limit, until it ruptured.
To find the absolute breaking point.
Exactly. And then they'd analyze that failure. Was it a weld? The material thickness? That data directly fed back into making the next version stronger, better, adding safety margins based on real-world breaking points.
That sounds intensive, but incredibly valuable.
Hugely valuable. And this approach, this idea of successful failures, it came from their early days.
You mean back in Germany?
Yeah, back then, they were literally writing the book on rocketry. Every failure was a critical lesson because the knowledge base just wasn't there yet. It bred this very conservative engineering culture. Build it strong, test it hard, learn from breaks.
And how much effort went into this testing?
Get this, the sources suggest about 50% of all the man-hours spent developing the Saturn rockets went into testing.
Half the entire effort, just testing.
Just testing, identifying weaknesses, understanding limits, ensuring reliability.
Wow. And compared to earlier programs, like Mercury or Gemini's rockets.
Well, earlier missiles like Redstone, which launched the first Americans, had like 37 test firings before Alan Shepard flew. The Atlas rocket for John Glenn's orbital flight, over 100 launches before they put him on top.
So a lot of prior flight testing.
A huge amount. But for Saturn, the Cold War pressure, the deadline, they didn't have the luxury of that many full-scale flight tests before needing the rocket for Apollo.
So these ground-based testing to failure methods became even more critical.
Absolutely essential. They had to build confidence in the hardware through other means, through this incredibly rigorous ground testing and analysis.
And all this testing, breaking things, analyzing, that must mean they were constantly building and rebuilding hardware, right? Lots of prototypes.
Exactly. While the sources don't give us like an exact number of prototypes for every single part, the whole philosophy implies constant iteration. Design, build, test to destruction, analyze, modify, build again.
A cycle of refinement.
A relentless cycle. And it wasn't just the rockets. At the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, where they built the command and lunar modules.
They were also quite conservative. They favored using components that already had a track record. Simple designs were possible. They were even hesitant about using integrated circuits early on because they were still relatively new technology.
Sticking with what they knew worked.
When possible, yes. And another huge factor for reliability, especially in the spacecraft, was redundancy.
Backups.
Lots of backups. For critical systems, you might have a primary component, a backup, maybe even a backup to the backup.
Seriously, 3 levels.
In some cases, yeah. The idea was that multiple independent things would have to fail before you lost a critical function or had to abort the mission. That's a massive commitment to safety and ensuring the mission could continue.
Okay, so we're seeing this picture emerge. Huge teams, different but converging ideas on reliability, and this almost obsessive focus on testing and redundancy.
Right. It's this foundation of immense, detailed preparation. And now let's think about the sheer ambition driving it all, how they view the risks involved. Wernher von Braun, again, offers some perspective. Yeah, he wasn't easily deterred, was he? I remember that quote about using the word impossible.
With the greatest caution. Yes. That really sums up the mindset, doesn't it? You need that kind of belief to even start something like Apollo.
Believing the impossible might just be possible.
But he also knew belief wasn't enough. He said, dreaming is not enough. You have to go for it with all your energy, with all your strength. It speaks to the sheer willpower and dedication needed from everyone involved.
That intensity, yeah. But even with all that preparation, all that dedication, the risks didn't just vanish.
Not at all. As we mentioned, the Antares failure is a modern reminder. Things can still go wrong, and the Apollo leadership knew this deep down.
They planned for failure scenarios.
Constantly. Why do you think they chose Merritt Island in Florida for the launch site? It's relatively isolated.
Safety distances.
Exactly. NASA actually did studies on what would happen if a fully fueled Saturn V exploded on the launch pad.
What were the findings?
The estimates were sobering. Some suggested the explosive force could be similar to a small tactical nuclear weapon, around half a kiloton of TNT equivalent.
Half a kiloton. from rocket fuel.
That's the kind of energy locked up in that massive rocket. It gives you a real sense of the power and the potential danger they were handling every single launch.
Unbelievable. So they were constantly weighing risk versus reward.
All the time. Walter Williams at MSC talked about this inherent trade-off between emphasis on crew survival as such and the end accomplishment of the mission. He acknowledged you couldn't eliminate all risk if you actually wanted to complete the mission.
A difficult balance.
A very difficult balance. Joseph Shea, the engineering confidence guy, put it pragmatically. He stressed finding the proper balance between the safety of the crew and the success of the mission.
Proper balance.
Yeah, and he pointed out that if you became too focused solely on safety to the exclusion of everything else, you could reach an absurd point where the safest thing is just never launch.
Right. The vehicle stays on the pad forever.
Yeah.
Defeats the purpose.
Exactly. So there was always this calculated risk, this acceptance that despite everything they did, things could still go catastrophically wrong.
So when we look back at all this, the thousands of people, these different philosophies on how to make things reliable, the obsessive testing, breaking things to make them stronger, the backups for the backups, and this constant awareness of catastrophic risk, that ladder to the stars metaphor really hits home, doesn't
It
it?
really does. Every single rung of that ladder was built with so much effort, so much analysis, so much testing, all driven by this incredible ambition, but also grounded in a very real understanding of the dangers.
It wasn't just dreaming. It was incredibly detailed, difficult, dangerous engineering.
Meticulously planned and executed, step by painstaking step. Acknowledging the risks, but pushing forward anyway.
Okay, so wrapping up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Apollo wasn't just about having a bold vision. It was this monumental, incredibly intricate engineering feat.
Yeah, involving different ways to tackle reliability, this relentless cycle of testing, constantly pushing boundaries and doing it all with eyes wide open to the dangers.
The sheer scale is just staggering.
Yeah.
Thousands of people, millions of hours, all focused on this one seemingly impossible goal.
It truly underscores the human capacity for massive coordinated effort when the motivation is strong enough.
And that leads us, and you listening, with something to think about, perhaps. Consider that level of ambition, that willingness to take on enormous risks, that defined Apollo. How do we approach that balance today? Between setting incredibly audacious goals or modern ladders to the stars, whatever they may be, and dealing with the inevitable setbacks and dangers.
Yeah, what level of preparation, what level... Well, today is launch day, July 16th, 1969. We're zeroing in on the Saturn V liftoff.
Right, not just the highlight reel, but really diving into the moment-by-moment stuff. We're using the actual real-time transcripts,
Yeah.
Launch control chatter, mission control audio.
Exactly. And NASA's own logs, eyewitness accounts, trying to capture that feeling, the sounds, the atmosphere at Kennedy Space Center.
It's all about bringing that day alive. We've got NASA archives, flight journals, personal stories. It paints a pretty vivid picture.
So picture it, the Saturn V, just immense, on the pad. It's early, still dark, Florida air, thick with anticipation. Let's get into those final hours. What was actually happening?
Well, it's fascinating because even as everything's converging on this huge moment, you've got these very real practical problems cropping up. Like while the crew, Armstrong, Collins, Aldrin were actually heading to the pad.
Don't tell me there was a problem then.
There was a leaking valve.
Oh, wow. On the rocket.
Thankfully, no, not on the vehicle itself. It was ground support equipment, part of the liquid hydrogen system for the third stage, about 200 feet up the tower.
Okay, phew. Still, a leak on launch day sounds tense.
It was definitely tense. And apparently, it wasn't the first time with that specific valve. It had acted up during a practice countdown, too. It just shows, the constant vigilance needed.
So why was this specific leak, this hydrogen leak, such a concern?
Well, liquid hydrogen is incredibly cold, cryogenic, and it naturally boils off, evaporates, even sitting there. So you keep topping it up right until the last second to ensure the third stage is fully fueled for launch.
Right, makes sense.
So yeah, they dispatched technicians, a safety officer, straight away to tighten the bolts. You could pick up on that tension reading the flight journal logs, launch control, talking to mission control, coordinating the crew arrival while this repair is happening simultaneously.
And meanwhile, the astronauts are arriving. The logs mention their van backing up to the elevator, even activating cameras to film them going in. It's this weird mix of monumental history and almost routine procedure.
It really is. That meticulous planning. Think about this. They take this high-speed elevator, right? 600 feet per minute, straight up to the 320-foot level where the command module was waiting.
Wow.
And even getting in was precise. Armstrong and Collins first, across Swing Arm 9 into the White Room. It's the clean room, right by the hatch. Then Aldrin boards last.
And Fred Hayes, the backup LMP, he was in there with them initially.
Yep, Fred Hayes went in to help with the first round of checkouts, then he'd leave them to it. You just imagine how cramped, how focused it must have been inside that capsule.
Well, outside, the ground crew is dealing with this leak.
Exactly. And then the word comes through, leak fixed. Hydrogen flow back to normal. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief through the comm loops.
I bet. But the work inside wasn't done. Armstrong was running checks.
Oh yeah, abort advisory system checks. Basically making sure the warning lights inside the cockpit worked, the ones that would signal if something was going wrong during ascent.
Like a final fire drill for the warning system.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And checking circuit breakers for the EDS, the emergency detection system. That's the system designed to automatically trigger an abort if things went catastrophic.
And there was some other small issue. Something about a cover.
Yeah, minor thing. A lanyard pull-to-release strut cover wasn't closing quite right. They actually needed the backup pilot's help to sort it out. It's those little moments, you know, the human element in the midst of all this high tech.
Then the hatch closure, another big step.
Huge step. Included leak checks for the cabin's environmental control system, the ECS. They pressurized the cabin with the specific mix, 60% oxygen, 40% nitrogen for liftoff. Though the crew, in their suits, were breathing pure O2.
For safe.
Exactly. And the checks just kept coming. Abort light system tests, Buzz Aldrin checking a gearbox, shear pin reset button. I mean, every single switch, every light, the flight journal details it all. It's just relentless.
That rigor, it's how they did it.
No doubt. And one of the longest checks was that EDS test. Took about half an hour. Armstrong basically ran through simulated emergencies, responding to cue lights triggered by a ground computer. A full dress rehearsal for disaster, really.
Intense.
Absolutely. Then, around T-minus 50 minutes, another milestone. Swing Arm 9, the access arm they walked across, pulls back, retracts about 5 feet away.
They must have felt that.
Oh yeah, they were told to expect a jolt. That arm stays parked there until just 5 minutes before launch. That's kind of the last physical link to the ground.
And once that arm moves back, things get even more serious.
That's when the arms of pyros, the pyrotechnic systems in the spacecraft itself, ready for a potential launch abort. Layer upon layer of safety.
Makes sense.
Armstrong does his final checks on the guidance system alignment. And then, you know, the moment they confirm the launch vehicle is officially go, despite that earlier hydrogen hiccup.
How did Armstrong react?
His response, logged in the transcript, just, that's real good news. Simple, understated. But you feel the relief.
Yeah, you really do.
Yeah.
What else was happening in that final hour?
Constant stream of info. Angle of attack readings from the vehicle, procedures for shutting down cabin fans, altimeter settings, barometric pressure for Armstrong.
All the final detail.
Right down to synchronizing watches, 8.26 AM EDT, an hour and 5 minutes to go. And logs note the civil defense estimate, over 1 million people watching in the area.
Yeah.
Traffic jams everywhere.
1 million people. Wow, the pressure.
Immense public focus. Then the countdown really picks up pace. T-minus 50 seconds, the Saturn V switches to internal power.
Cutting the cord.
Yep. Guidance goes internal at T17 seconds. Engine ignition sequence starts at T-minus 8.9 seconds. You can just feel it ramping up.
And the crew, what are they saying?
Amazingly calm. T-minus 30 seconds, the report is, it feels good. Then Armstrong, T-minus 55 seconds. It's been a real smooth countdown, just incredible composure.
Just before the automatic sequence kicks in.
Right, at T-minus 3 minutes, 7 seconds. But just before that, Paul Donnelly, the launch ops manager, gets on the loop. Good luck and Godspeed.
And Armstrong.
Thank you very much. No, it'll be a good one. Just total confidence. Test pilot. Cool.
Amazing.
Then the final minutes. Pressurizing the propellant tanks to flight levels. They even tell the crew the distance to the moon at that exact moment of liftoff.
What was it?
218,096 nautical miles. Imagine hearing that number right before launch.
Mind-boggling.
Final switch flips. Primary glycol rad valve to bypass. Then last minute, commander and LMP turn off the PCOM switches, basically isolating themselves for liftoff.
Okay, so the rocket itself, how was it set up? Any specific moves planned right after liftoff?
Yeah, the logs detail that. On the pad, the rocket's x-axis is up, y is north, z is west. The plan was to roll 18 degrees right after clearing the tower, then start the pitch over maneuver. And a tiny yaw, just to nudge it away from the tower structure initially.
Very precise.
Super precise. Even angling the outboard engine slightly away from the center around 20 seconds in. It was a safety thing in case one engine quit early.
Right.
Just layers of contingency planning.
You mentioned aborts earlier. Those modes, 1 Alpha, 1 Bravo.
Right. Crucial safety systems. 1 Alpha was the mode for the first 42 seconds. If something went wrong, the launch escape tower, the LET, fires its motor, pulls the command module clear using a pitch motor to steer it.
Okay.
Think in 1 Bravo, good up to about 35 kilometers. If they aborted then, little fins called canards pop out on the tower to orient the capsule correctly before it separates. We actually hear the call 1 Bravo. At T plus 44 seconds, they'd passed the first window.
And Houston confirms, good at 1 minute. A big check mark.
Huge check mark. Then max Q, maximum dynamic pressure, hits at 1 minute 23 seconds. That's when the aerodynamic forces on the rocket are most intense.
Must have been a rough ride through there.
You'd think so, but the Saturn V was built for it. After that, they enter mode 1 Charlie, higher up, maybe 30 kilometers or so. Air's too thin for the canards then.
So how would an abort work then?
If needed, the LET gets jettisoned, and the command module uses its own little thrusters for control. But then, the call they were all waiting for, go for staging. T plus 2 minutes 3 seconds, time to drop the first stage.
And the center engine shuts down slightly before the others?
Yeah, inboard engine cutoff confirmed around T plus 2 minutes 17, 19 seconds. That was deliberate to limit the G-forces, the acceleration, on the crew as the rocket got lighter, burning all that fuel. Smart engineering.
It's incredible, the technical detail, but what about the human side? The eyewitness stuff?
Oh, that really adds color.
Yeah.
Joanne Morgan, an engineer there, talked about this tangible, positive feeling at the pad that morning and how the venting propellant looked enchanting, almost magical.
Huh. Enchanting.
Yeah. And Buzz Aldrin, he remembered this quiet moment, looking up at the rocket before getting in. Called it lonely and yet private, peaceful. A moment of calm before the chaos.
And the crowds, Robert Seek saw them?
Oh, he described total gridlock. And people literally pulling blades of grass by the roadside as souvenirs.
Oh.
Just shows the scale of public fascination.
Definitely. Now, about the sound of that launch, there are some wild stories, right? Melting concrete, starting fires.
Yeah, those myths persist.
Mm-hmm.
But some good research, actually from BYU, looked into the physics. They modeled the sound level at about 203 decibels close up, which is incredibly loud, way louder than a jet engine.
303 decibels.
Deafening. But their conclusion was sound alone probably wouldn't melt concrete or start grass fires miles away. It was more likely the intense heat radiating from the exhaust plume or maybe burning debris getting thrown off.
So loud, but not that kind of destructive loud.
Exactly. It's about distinguishing sound power from sound pressure at a distance. Still immensely powerful, just maybe not quite the way the myths portray it. Important to separate anecdote from physics sometimes.
Good point. And if people want to experience this launch as closely as possible,
They absolutely have to check out Ben Feist's Apollo 11 in real-time website. It's phenomenal. He synced up something like 11,000 hours of mission control audio.
11,000 hours.
Yeah. Plus all the space-to-ground comms, onboard audio, photos, video, all perfectly timed to the mission clock. You can literally follow along second by second. It's the closest thing to being there.
That sounds incredible. A must-see for anyone interested.
It truly is an amazing resource and just shows the incredible effort that went into recording and preserving all this history.
Looking back at everything we've covered just for the launch,
Yeah.
the meticulousness is just staggering.
It really is. Every single check, every system, every potential failure planned for. The level of detail is almost hard to comprehend.
And listening to those transcripts, you get that mix, don't you? The technical talk, but also the human element, the brief, real good news, the calm reports under pressure.
Absolutely. It's that blend of engineering precision and human focus, human emotion even, that really comes through.
And just thinking about the sheer number of people, the complexity of the systems, everything had to work perfectly together at that exact moment.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About trust. The trust placed in the technology, yes, but also the trust in the teams, in each other. What does that say about what humans can achieve when they work together on something that ambitious?
That capacity for huge, complex projects.
Yeah, it's a testament to human ambition, planning, and maybe, a little bit of daring too. It's definitely something profound to consider looking back at that morning in Florida.
A power. Now, as part of our ongoing look at Apollo 11 on Runner Stories for the Road, we've really reached the edge of your seat moment, haven't we?
We absolutely have. I mean, after that long journey, getting into lunar orbit, now the focus shifts squarely onto the lunar module, the Eagle.
With Armstrong and Aldrin inside.
Exactly. And they're Well, their incredibly perilous descent down to the surface. This is really where all that planning, all the simulations were put to the ultimate test.
And for this deep dive, we're digging into the official sources, the Apollo 11 mission report, which is just packed with detail.
And the technical crew debriefing, too. That's where Armstrong and Aldrin themselves, talked through every single moment right after the mission.
Plus the air-to-ground voice transcripts, raw, real-time communication.
Right. So what we want to do here is really get inside those moments, understand the challenges, the almost unbelievable precision that was needed.
And the human element, right, the decisions they had to make under pressure based on what they were actually seeing out the window.
Precisely. Using their own words and the official reports.
Okay, let's get into it. The descent wasn't just dropping, was it? It started with something called the Descent Orbit Insertion Maneuver. What was that about?
Yeah, that DOI maneuver, it was crucial. It wasn't about just falling. It was about setting the stage perfectly for the powered part of the descent.
Setting the stage how?
Well, the idea was to shift the Eagle into a very specific orbit, 60 by 8.2 nautical miles, an ellipse.
That sounds incredibly precise.
It was, and it served a couple of purposes. It gave them time for final checks, got them lined up correctly, but also critically, it did this while conserving as much fuel as possible.
Fuel being the big one.
Always. So the lowest point of this orbit, the pericynthion, was positioned about 260 miles before the target landing site. Think of it like the final turn before the runway.
Okay, the starting gate for the powered descent.
Exactly. That's where they kicked off the main burn to start heading down.
Got it. So a very calculated, fuel-conscious beginning.
Absolutely. And the design of that powered descent, the trajectory itself, was, well, it was incredibly complex.
I bet. What went into planning that trajectory?
Oh, loads of things. The mission report lists them out.
Mm.
Obviously, optimal propellant use, #1 priority.
Right.
But also, potential errors in navigation, how well the landing radar would work, what the terrain might be like, which they didn't know for sure.
And even what the crew could actually see out the windows.
Exactly. They had to balance all these variables, planning it way back on Earth. It's kind of mind-boggling.
And it wasn't just a case of push the button and let the computer fly it. Was there room for the crew to intervene?
Oh, definitely. That was built in. The basic idea was, save fuel during the big braking burn initially.
Slowing down from orbital speed.
Right. Then transition to a standard final approach phase. This was designed specifically to give the crew time to visually check out the landing area.
So they could actually pick the spot.
Yes. The onboard computer, the guidance system, allowed them to actually redesignate the target landing site. They could punch in new coordinates, or
Take over completely.
Or Armstrong could take full manual control, and they made sure the manual mode was compatible with the automatic system's parameters.
But there was always that one big limitation hanging over them.
Propellant.
Yes.
Always the propellant. The mission report mentions it again and again. That was the hard limit on how much flexibility they really had.
Okay, so the descent starts automatically, heading for that pre-planned zone. But things didn't quite go according to plan, did they?
No, this is where it gets really tense, and frankly, where Armstrong's skull becomes absolutely critical.
What happened?
As the Eagle was coming down automatically, the crew, Armstrong especially, from his window, looked ahead at where the computer was taking them.
And
it wasn't good. The mission report says the target area looked like it was right in the middle of a boulder field. Big rocks scattered everywhere, surrounding a pretty large, sharp-rimmed crater.
a boulder field. That sounds like the worst possible place to land.
You really couldn't pick much worse for a stable landing. So, the reaction had to be immediate.
Manual control.
Yes. The report states manual control was assumed. Armstrong took the stick. Their goal instantly changed from land here to find somewhere safe, fast.
So they had to fly past the target area.
Essentially, yes. They needed to extend their range, fly over that bad spot, and actively look for a better patch of ground further downrange.
Which uses more fuel.
Exactly. Every second of manual flight, every maneuver, was eating into their margins.
And they used a specific computer program to help with this, P66.
That's right. Program P66, it's called the rate of descent mode. Entering that basically gave Armstrong more direct, more sensitive control over their vertical speed.
Like putting it in low gear?
Sort of, yeah. It allowed him to slow the descent rate right down, almost hover, giving him precious seconds to really scan the surface below. More time to see, more time to decide.
So, Armstrong's flying manually, Aldrin's calling out altitude and speed, and they're hunting for a safe haven. What did they find?
Well, the report describes how Armstrong maneuvered them downrange and also made cross-range adjustments, side to side. They were actively piloting, looking for any clear level-ish area.
Must have been intense.
Unbelievably so. The spot they eventually chose was pretty small, actually. The report says it was bounded by that boulder field they had just overflown to the north, and then big craters to the east and south.
Talk about threading the needle.
Absolutely. A very tight spot requiring a very precise final approach.
And just to add another layer of difficulty, the report mentions dust becoming a problem.
Yes, that was a major challenge right at the end. As they got below about 100 feet or so, the descent engine blast started kicking up lunar dust. A lot of it.
Creating a sort of cloud.
Exactly. It obscured the surface, making it really hard to judge things visually, like how fast they were drifting sideways, their exact height, their sink rate. All those crucial visual cues started to get washed out.
That sounds terrifying. How could they land if they couldn't properly see the ground?
Well, the report says that even though the visual cues were degraded, other cues were still adequate.
Like what? Instruments.
Instruments, definitely. They were glued to the radar altitude, the descent rate indicators, plus, their training. They'd spent hundreds of hours in simulators practicing exactly these kinds of scenarios and just the feel of the machine.
So relying on instruments, training, and pilot instinct.
A combination of all three. They were making constant tiny adjustments to thrust and attitude, just fighting to keep it stable all the way down through that dust cloud.
And then touchdown. The report gives some estimates for the landing conditions.
Yeah, pretty amazing estimates given everything. They figured about 1 or 2 feet per second sideways drift, mostly to the left, pretty much 0 forward or backward motion.
And vertical speed.
Just about 1 foot per second down, a gentle touchdown. And critically, they reported no instability, no rocking or tipping on landing, a testament to the control and the lander's design.
Okay, this is it, the moment everyone held their breath for. Let's just take a second and share those words again, maybe slow down a bit to really feel the weight of it.
Absolutely. Think about the tension in mission control around the world, and then this transmission comes through. The relief must have been immense.
Eagle has landed.
History made. Right there.
And then, just a bit later, another moment that changed everything. Neil Armstrong, preparing to step onto the moon.
A moment for all humanity, really. Bigger than any one nation.
That's one small step, 4 steps, one giant leap for mankind.
Chills every single time. Those words coming from another world. Just incredible.
Truly, it really underscores the technical brilliance, but also that human courage and skill that made it happen. Now, you mentioned the mission report also touches on the lunar module's performance during the descent itself. Any hiccups with the hardware?
There were a couple of things noted, yes. The report mentions that the crew saw warning flags for the thrust chamber assembly, basically part of the descent engine on 3 out of the 4 chambers.
Warning flags. During descent.
Actually, just before powered descent initiation and during some earlier checks, they believe these flags triggered master alarms.
That sounds concerning.
It probably was. But interestingly, Armstrong and Aldrin were able to reset them by cycling a circuit breaker. It seems like while these anomalies happened, they didn't actually stop the landing.
So a testament to the system's redundancy and the crew's ability to troubleshoot on the fly.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It just highlights how well-trained they were and how robust the LM systems were designed to be, even with minor glitches under that kind of pressure.
So if we pull it all together, this deep dive into those final landing moments, what are the big takeaways for you?
For me, it's 2 things, really. First, the sheer, almost unbelievable level of precision engineered into this whole thing, from orbital mechanics down to engine control.
Right.
But second, and maybe even more importantly, is the human factor. The skill, the adaptability, the courage of Armstrong and Aldrin. That aha moment is definitely when Armstrong saw the boulders and just took over.
That decision to go manual.
Yes. Recognizing the danger from the computer's plan, trusting his own eyes, and piloting ability to find a safe spot. That was absolutely crucial. Without that decision, who knows?
It really highlights that you can't automate everything. You need human judgment in the loop, especially when things go off script.
Exactly. They faced the unexpected of the boulder field, the dust later on, and they handled it. They used their training, their instruments, their skill, and found a way.
Despite the challenges, the dust obscuring their view right at the end.
Despite that, the combination of the LM's design, their training, and the remaining cues they had was enough. It just speaks volumes about the level of preparation.
So for you, the listener, thinking about this, just try to imagine being in that cockpit. Fuel running low, alarms maybe having gone off, flying manually over unknown, hazardous terrain on the moon for the first time ever, with the whole world watching.
The pressure is almost unimaginable.
What does that ability to perform under that kind of extreme duress, to make life or death decisions in seconds, tell us about human adaptability? About our drive to explore, to push boundaries, even when it seems impossible.
It's an incredible example, isn't it? That blend of meticulous planning, advanced technology, and ultimately irreplaceable human skill and courage. That's what got Eagle onto the surface of the moon.
A defining moment powered by ingenuity and sheer human will.
We're kind of shifting focus, not just the getting there, but what it felt like to look back, seeing Earth from the moon.
Yeah, it's a perspective that's, well, really captured the imagination ever since, hasn't it? Maybe let's hold on to this image as we talk. You know, that blue marble suspended in black. Every war, every love, every dream contained in that fragile sphere. Sets the stage, I think.
Absolutely. And we have some great insights, particularly from, well, Buzz Aldrin himself. He wrote this really thoughtful letter to Professor Goldman, reflecting on it. He called it The Journey of a Lifetime, and talked about feeling connected to Earth.
It's amazing, that sense of connection across, what, hundreds of thousands of miles? And it stayed with him. He even did one of those Reddit AMAs, you know, Ask Me Anything.
Oh, right, yeah.
Answered all sorts of questions about the landing, his experiences. It shows how much that mission still resonates personally.
And that leads us right into this core idea for today, the overview effect. It's more than just a pretty picture, right? It's described as this real shift in awareness, seeing Earth as this tiny, fragile ball of life.
Exactly. That term overview effect, we owe that to Frank White. He wrote about it back in '87 in his book, The Overview Effect, Space Exploration and Human Evolution. He noticed this pattern in astronauts' accounts, this sort of profound change in perspective about Earth and our place, you know?
Okay, so let's dig into Aldrin's view a bit more. That letter you mentioned, funny date, September 2024, but looking back at '69, that journey of a lifetime, what stood out to you there?
Well, for me, it's that feeling of connection he described. Like even standing on the moon, he felt this strong bond with everyone back home.
Right.
It wasn't just about being away, it was also about being part of something, even from that distance. It almost undermines the idea of separation, doesn't it?
It really does. Did that same feeling come across in the Reddit AMA? Or is that more about like the technical stuff?
It was a mix, as you'd expect. Lots of questions about the landing itself, the spacecraft, future missions. But yeah, underlying it all, you could still sense the sheer significance of the experience for him, for humanity. Maybe not using the term overview effect, but the feeling was definitely there.
Okay, let's talk about the visual itself. Just trying to imagine seeing Earth hanging there, this bright ball against pitch black.
It must be incredible. Astronauts always talk about that contrast, this vibrant, living oasis against just nothingness, infinite dark. It apparently makes Earth look incredibly precious, but also kind of isolated.
And that reminds me of William Anders from Apollo 8, remember? We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth.
That quote, it's perfect. And Apollo 8 didn't even land, they just orbited. But seeing Earth rise over the lunar horizon, wow, it captures that shift perfectly. You go to see the moon, but you end up seeing home in a totally new way.
And the picture they took, Earthrise, on Christmas Eve, '68, that image became iconic.
Oh, absolutely. Its impact was huge. People saw it, and it brought that perspective down to Earth, literally. Many people think it was a big catalyst for the environmental movement, maybe even helped inspire the first Earth Day in 1970. A single photo.
It's incredible. A picture from the moon sparking environmental action back here. Shows the power of that view.
It really does. And another thing they all mention, no borders.
Right. From up there, you just don't see them. The lines on the map, they're just gone.
Exactly. It's just one planet. And apparently that visual really hits home. It fosters this sense of unity. You know, we're all on this thing together. Suddenly the focus isn't your country. It's the whole system, our shared home. And, well, our shared responsibility.
Rusty Schweikart, Apollo 9, he put it really well. When you go around the Earth in an hour and a half, you begin to recognize that your identity is with that whole thing.
Yeah, that's powerful. An hour and a half to circle the globe. It shrinks the world and expands your identity all at once. You are that whole thing.
Which flows right into environmental awareness, doesn't it? Seeing how thin the atmosphere looks.
Oh, absolutely. They talk about seeing it as this incredibly thin, fragile blue line, like cellophane wrap or something. It makes you realize just how delicate our life support system is, how vulnerable.
Now, you said many astronauts become much more active environmentalists afterwards.
Yeah, it seems quite common, seeing it firsthand, its beauty and its fragility against that immense black backdrop. It often creates this deep sense of needing to protect it. It's not abstract anymore.
So it's not just seeing, it's thinking and feeling differently too. A cognitive shift, an emotional one.
Definitely. It's more than just, wow, pretty view. It changes how you think about Earth, humanity, our place in the universe. This sense of interconnectedness really deepens. Some research even suggests it might, like, rewire your brain a bit, change your basic understanding of the world.
And the emotions must be intense. Awe, wonder. Looking back at everything you've ever known from somewhere else entirely.
Overwhelming is a word that comes up a lot. Awe at the beauty, wonder at the complexity, but also this profound sense of responsibility. It's deeply moving, apparently, transformative.
And it sticks with them. These aren't just feelings they have up there. They can lead to long-term changes.
Seems so. That feeling of awe, maybe even self-transcendence, it can really settle in and shift their outlook for good. They often talk about feeling more connected to all of humanity, not just their own group or nation, a broader sense of community.
Like Edgar Mitchell, another Apollo guy, said, in outer space, you develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. That's quite a statement.
It really is. It shows how this experience can light a fire under you, a drive to make things better, to tackle the big problems because you've seen the bigger picture.
It's fascinating that scientists compare this to other, self-transcendent experiences, or SDEs.
Right. Things like deep meditation, prayer, peak experiences in nature, sometimes even experiences with psychedelics. They share some qualities with the overview effect, that feeling of your sense of self dissolving into something larger, that deep connection, the profound meaning.
But spaceflight is this totally unique trigger for it. Not meditation, not a drug, but actually seeing Earth from the outside.
Exactly. It's a novel context, providing a perspective that's, arguably impossible to achieve any other way.
It makes you think about Fred Hoyle, the British astronomer. He predicted, didn't he, that seeing a photo of Earth from space would unleash some powerful new idea.
He really nailed that one. That image and the perspective it represents, it did seem to unlock something, a new way of seeing ourselves.
And even now on the ISS, astronauts are still constantly taking pictures of Earth, aren't they?
Oh, thousands of them.
Wow.
In just the first 8 long missions to the ISS, the crews took a huge number of Earth photos, often just because they wanted to. It shows how compelling that view still is, day after day. It doesn't seem to get old.
And there's actual research backing this up, that seeing Earth's beauty and fragility changes you psychologically.
Yeah, it's not just stories. Studies are looking into it, suggesting these altered perceptions are real psychological effects of spaceflight. It's a recognized phenomenon.
Okay, shifting gears just a little bit, back to Buzz Aldrin's Reddit AMA. He shared a funny detail about the flag, didn't he?
Yeah. He mentioned that when they blasted off from the moon, the exhaust from the lunar module actually knocked the American flag over.
No way.
Yep, just blew it down. It's such a human detail, isn't it? Amidst this incredible achievement, this symbol they planted, oops, a little reminder of the practical, sometimes messy reality of being there.
It's actually pretty funny. Adds a relatable touch to the whole thing.
It does. Even pioneers have little mishaps.
So wrapping up this part of the story, seeing Earth from the moon, it clearly wasn't just incidental. It was profound. The overview effect. It really brings us back to that image we started with. A blue marble suspended in black.
Mm-hmm. All of human history, everything, on that one fragile sphere.
Every war, every love, every dream contained right there.
It certainly puts things in perspective. From that distance, our conflicts, our divisions, they must seem so small compared to the fact that we all share this single home.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. How does just thinking about Earth that way, as that fragile blue marble, shift your own perspective? Does contemplating the overview effect change how you think about our planet, our shared humanity, our responsibilities, even if we can't go see it for ourselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. Can we cultivate some of that unity, that sense of shared fate right here on the ground, inspired by what they saw up there?
Something to return trip, the splashdown, those unique safety measures they took afterwards, and just the sheer explosion of reaction around the world.
Yeah, and for this bit, we've got some great sources lined up. We're pulling from NASA's own accounts, naturally, the Apollo 11 Flight Journal, which is incredibly detailed, a Space.com piece specifically on the quarantine aspect,
Oh, interesting.
the National Air and Space Museum's take on the global impact, National Archives looking at how other countries reacted, even a Reddit post showing old newspaper headlines, which is pretty cool.
Wow, a real mix.
And the NYC Department of Records giving us the lowdown on that famous ticker tape parade.
Okay, so our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to really get a feel for what happened immediately after they left the moon, the splashdown mechanics, sure, but also that whole quarantine business, why, and then, yeah, the global party that seemed to break out. Ready to jump in.
Let's do it. So those final hours before hitting the atmosphere were tense,
I bet.
But also, interestingly, things were going so well that Mission Control actually canceled the very last planned course correction. Didn't need it.
Wow, that speaks volumes about the navigation, doesn't it?
It really does. Precision stuff. About 5 hours before re-entry, the crew woke up and, well, they started taking pictures of Earth getting bigger and bigger outside their window.
Can you even imagine that view?
Yeah.
Just, wow. So the timing, was it nailed down pretty tight?
Oh, yeah. The flight journal pegs atmospheric entry at 195 hours, 3 minutes, 7 seconds, ground elapsed time, or get T. Splashdown predicted just about 14 minutes later. Incredible accuracy.
That's just mind-boggling. And were they getting updates from Earth during this?
They were. Houston sent up what they called a Maroon Bugle news update. It wasn't just mission stuff. It was like snippets from Earth. Told them the world was waiting, that President Nixon had called their wives.
Oh, that's a nice touch. Humanizes it.
Exactly. And, other news too. Tax reforms, a satellite launch delay, just grounding this extraordinary thing in, well, ordinary life back home.
Yeah, keeps it real somehow. Okay, so re-entry. That sounds like a rough ride.
It's definitely intense. First, they jettisoned the service module, the big cylindrical part they didn't need anymore. They actually watched it float away.
Huh. Must have been strange to see.
Then came the plunge into the atmosphere. And this is where things get dramatic. The friction, the speed, it creates so much heat that the air around the command module ionizes, basically turns into plasma.
And that causes the communications blackout.
Exactly. For several minutes, total silence, mission control, the whole world just waiting, holding their breath.
Nerve-wracking.
Hugely. But, the calculations are right. The heat shield held. Splashdown happened right on schedule in the Pacific southwest of Hawaii, around 12:51 p.m. Eastern Time, July 24th. The flight journal puts the final time at 195 hours, 17 minutes, 53 seconds Getty.
And the capsule itself, did it land upright?
Actually, no. Initially, it stabilized upside down. They called it stable 2 position.
Okay.
But that was expected. Flotation bags inflated automatically and flipped it upright into stable 1. Mike Collins apparently said the ocean looked a startling violet color right then.
A violet ocean. What a detail to remember after all that.
So how did they get the guys out?
Right, the recovery. The aircraft carrier USS Hornet was waiting. Helicopters deployed swimmers, Swim 1, Swim 2 teams. Their job was to get to the capsule, attach a sea anchor to stabilize it, and help the astronauts. And those white suits we see in the pictures, the sort of biohazard-looking ones.
Ah, yes. The biological isolation garments, or BIGs, crucial part of the plan. A specific swimmer, L-Team Clancy Heidelberg, had the job of delivering these suits to the capsule.
So they put them on inside before opening the hatch.
Precisely. They donned the BIGs while still sealed inside the command module. Then the hatch area was decontaminated. They came out, got sprayed down again, just to be sure.
Wow, really cautious.
Extremely. Then a helicopter, Recovery 1, whisked them off to the Hornet and straight into something called the Mobile Quarantine Facility, the MQF.
Okay, the MQF leads us right into the quarantine topic.
And just a quick, powerful side note. During the recovery, the big board in Mission Control reportedly showed President Kennedy's 1961 goal landing a man on the moon and returning him safely before the decade was out. Goal achieved.
Chills. Just wow. Okay, quarantine 21 days, you said. Why so long, and what was the thinking?
Well, you have to put yourself back in 1969. This is the first time humans had gone to another world and come back. Nobody really knew if there might be some kind of, lunar microbes, moon germs.
Right, the great unknown.
Exactly. Yeah. So NASA took the better safe than sorry route. It was extremely cautious. The idea was to absolutely prevent any potential extraterrestrial organism, however unlikely, from getting out.
little biocontainment protocol.
Absolutely. The MQF on the Hornet was just the start. That housed them for the trip back to Hawaii, then the flight to Houston. Once in Houston at the Manned Spacecraft Center, now Johnson Space Center, the MQF was physically connected to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, or LRL.
The LRL. What was that like inside? Was it like a prison?
Not really, by all accounts. It was purpose-built, yes, but designed to be reasonably comfortable. It had living quarters for the crew and support staff, labs for handling the moon rocks under containment, a kitchen, lounge, medical area. Dr. Judith Hayes from NASA described it as quite comfortable.
Okay.
Neil Armstrong actually celebrated his 39th birthday in there. They even had a cake.
Ah, a birthday in quarantine after walking on the moon. So what did they do for 3 weeks?
They were busy, writing up detailed pilot reports, extensive debriefings about every aspect of the mission. They even started debriefing with the Apollo 12 crew, who are already training for the next moon landing.
Already planning the next one.
And of course, they were involved in the initial look at the lunar samples. They brought back all 48 pounds of them. It was Neil Armstrong who, at the press conference after quarantine, called the whole thing a great adventure spanning the decade.
The perfect summary. And the command module, Columbia. What happened to it?
While the crew was isolated, Columbia was shipped off for detailed post-flight inspections. Every system checked and double-checked. And, thinking about the quarantine again, it's worth remembering the public health context back then. Polio was still a recent memory. Fear of new viruses was real. So moon germs tapped into a genuine public anxiety.
Makes sense. It wasn't just science fiction paranoia.
Not entirely. Actually, there's an anecdote that President Nixon wanted to have dinner with the crew right before launch.
Oh, wow. That would have messed up their pre-flight quarantine, wouldn't it?
Big time. Thankfully, calmer heads prevailed, and that dinner didn't happen. And kind of sadly, the LRL itself, that unique historical facility, it's actually scheduled to be torn down soon, making way for new sample return facilities.
Huh? End of an era, I suppose. So, quarantine ends. They're cleared. What happens next? The world must have gone nuts.
Absolutely nuts is a good way to put it. First, reunions with their families, finally face-to-face. Then the big post-flight press conference. And then the celebrations kicked off. Big time. August 13th, New York City. A massive ticker tape parade. The city records talk about just unbelievable crowds.
I can only imagine the confetti. Must have been feet deep.
Probably. Then it was Chicago's turn for another huge parade. After that, a formal state dinner out in Los Angeles hosted by President Nixon. And this wasn't just a U.S. thing. You had astronauts, Congress, governors, sure, but also ambassadors from 83 other countries.
83 nations represented. That really shows the global significance.
It really does. And the homecoming in Houston on August 16th was just as big. It ended with this giant barbecue and a tribute show in the Astrodome, hosted by Frank Sinatra, no less.
Sinatra. Wow.
President Nixon was pretty ecstatic. He declared famously, "This is the greatest week in the history of the world since creation."
High praise indeed. Captures the mood, I guess.
It does. And the personal impact was huge. The Air and Space Museum archives stories like a father saying he'd never been more proud of being an American, or a kid in Puerto Rico running back and forth between the TV and the balcony, trying to somehow see the moon while watching the landing. Armstrong's words, "one giant leap for mankind," really hit home everywhere.
It felt like everyone owned a piece of it, didn't it? Not just America.
Exactly. The U.S. Information Agency reported that anticipation worldwide was immense, even before they splashed down. Buzz Aldrin actually reflected later, on Twitter I think, that the unity they saw on Earth because of the mission might have been the biggest thing they actually missed while they were up there.
That's profound. Being the cause of unity, but being too far away to fully experience it at the time.
Yeah. And we see that reflected in things like that Reddit post showing the newspaper headlines. The New York Times, "Men walk on moon." So simple, so powerful. The evening news, too. Just stark declarations of this incredible fact.
History being written right there in ink.
And on a much lighter note, that same Reddit thread mentioned how the moon landing reveal in the movie Dumb and Dumber was apparently improvised by Jim Carrey, which is hilarious.
No way. That's amazing. Moon landing trivia infiltrating comedy decades later.
Right. Shows its cultural footprint. And you had things like Air Canada jokingly taking reservations for moon flights. Nashville apparently got flooded with moon theme songs.
Everyone wanted in on the act.
Totally. But it's also key, as NASA's own news releases showed, that even as Apollo 11 was returning, plans for Apollo 12 were already being announced. The momentum was there. This wasn't the end. It was, in many ways, just the beginning of the next phase.
So this incredible moment of celebration, but also the machine keeps moving. The next mission is already on the horizon. What a whirlwind, the splashdown, the extreme caution of quarantine, and then just this wave of global joy.
It's such a fascinating mix, isn't it? You've got the absolute peak of careful, methodical engineering ensuring their safety, side by side with this just completely spontaneous, emotional outpouring of pride and wonder from people all over the planet.
It really is. So maybe the thought to leave you with is this. Think about how that single event, landing on the moon, managed to create such a powerful shared moment for humanity. Even a world as complicated and divided as it was in 1969. How did it cut through all that? And how does that echo, or maybe not echo today? Something to ponder about our shared goals and our place out there in the cosmos.